Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone is having a great day. I hope that everyone has enjoyed their Friday, and it's the weekend. And for those in the United States and other countries that observe it, if there are any, today or this weekend is Memorial Day, so I hope you guys get to enjoy a nice 3-day weekend. But there is a lot of news currently ongoing, and there are certainly a lot of different crises going on throughout the world, and so we can't just forget. Because the crisis in Ukraine, the current ongoing war, and the subsequent humanitarian crisis, we can't just forget about these other countries in the world, these other major crises that are happening globally that are impacting millions of people. Over 100 million refugees. That's the largest amount that the UN has ever recorded at any period of time. So we're talking about places such as Ethiopia, Somalia, Southeast Asia, as well as, of course, the current events going on in the country of Ukraine and the ongoing war, and once again, that subsequent humanitarian crisis. We have to remember that millions and millions of tons of different food and medical aid was redirected from the ongoing crises that were happening long before the war to the war zone. And they are currently having to take food, in their words, not mine, take food from the hungry to give it to the starving. So please be sure to check out in the description below, because we want to be able to be the news that gives back. And we can only do that with your community support. So please check out the description below. And if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe. Because the more people that we reach with this news, one, they have a new independent news source that they can go to for reliable information. But also, more people will come here and watch this and be able to donate to these different crises going on throughout the world and help people. We personally go through and we vet each of these organizations, each of these links, and make sure that, one, it is a verified organization, and two, at least 80% or more of your donations go directly to the program, meaning that they're not going to people's salaries or they're not going to administration's costs. They're going to help people. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and dive right into the news, because there's a decent amount coming out today, especially when it comes to the Donbass. And we're actually going to be jumping right into the Donbass with today's top headline, and that's because the Battle of Severodonetsk has begun. Now, this is something that is kind of ambiguous, because truly, the battle just began today? No. There has been active fighting for some time now on the outskirts of the city of Severodonetsk. What is happening today, the major shift, is that despite not being able to complete their encirclement movement, Russian forces are beginning their assault on the city itself. Whether or not they make ground, the assessments right now is saying they probably will not make significant gains, but this is a war and anything is up to chance. The enemy will always get a say, and they have the final word. So it all depends on how much they really want to pour into this. We know that the Battle of Mariupol took months. It took thousands of deaths, and it also took high casualties on the part of the Russian forces, as well as significant bombardment, to the point that whatever they really took of Mariupol, for all intents and purposes, really doesn't exist anymore. And despite all this, with the calm before the main storm, we're seeing that morale is rather high on the side of the Ukraine. And this is a photo that we're getting from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is a photo taken from Severodonetsk today, with that Ukrainian flag being posted nice and high above the city, and Ukrainian troops at least seemingly being in a very upbeat mood despite what they're being faced up against. Now, we know Russian forces are having a difficult time. They are not making significant ground within the Donbass at this point, but Severodonetsk is a very key point in this conflict. Severodonetsk is the last major Ukrainian city within the Luhansk region that is still under Ukrainian control, meaning separatists and Russian forces maintain what has been announced so far about 95% of control over the Luhansk region itself. So this is one of the largest cities in the Luhansk region, but it's also a very key city, and it's really the major stronghold for Ukrainian forces in in the Luhansk region as a whole. So this is where their administrations are. This is where a lot of their troops are. They have a significant defensive positions on the outskirts of the city. As you can see, this bulge has formed around the city of Severodonetsk. Something that we have seen is that there is, depending on the source, there's significant activity, and what they're saying is some rather large Russian gains and further near encirclement of the city, despite not being a full encirclement. We do not have enough independent information to be able to say that. So this is not yet depicted. As we get more information in the future, this could change. Getting specifically into that assault, we can actually see it here. So like I was saying, Russian forces for some time now, over the last several weeks, have been attempting to encircle Ukrainian forces really within this pocket, specifically to cut off Severodonetsk and allow and trap a large number of Ukrainian forces within a pocket and then basically squeeze them. A full-scale encirclement movement. They have not been successful. They have had hiccups along the river over here by Bilohorivka, where they were unable to cross and lost significant forces here. They had significant resistance in and around the city of Popasna, where their forces along this axis of advance has been essentially bogged down and stalled. They have a little bit of a renewed effort within this region. In fact, we've seen them push up all the way to Solot. However, it's not anything significant enough to even consider it an encirclement. We've also seen them start to make gains up here in Lyman, which I actually still show as contested, but we do know for a fact that Lyman is no longer in control. So they do so I'm moving that now here on camera to represent more of those gains. But Lyman up here, there was a tactical withdrawal from this area from the Ukrainian forces. They had been rather battered by Russian artillery within this region and significant fighting, and they conducted a tactical withdrawal. They're outside of just taking Lyman. It's believed they moved to set up defensive positions along the river. That is not confirmed yet, and we do not have enough information to say that that has completely occurred. So we're only going to say that Lyman is in control of the Russian forces, as we have enough evidence and proof to state as such. But as you can see, they're attempting to, but they're unable to successfully encircle Severodonetsk. But they're going ahead with this assault anyway. And that is why they're thinking that they probably won't take any significant it will take a long period of time to make any significant gains if they make them to begin with. And we can actually see this here. So this is actually from what is they're considered a backgrounder on the Institute for the Study of War. Very reliable source, very thorough source. They give daily updates regarding what's going on in Ukraine, and I highly recommend checking them out. They're one of, when we go to update the maps, they, along with several other sources, are one of our references to see what's going on in the battlescape at a strategic level. Because while I may have military experience, I am more voiced at the tactical level and not the strategic. So, as we're seeing here, they're saying that there are Russian gains in and around Severodonetsk. They're saying that that the Russian forces are claiming control over that territory. We do not have enough evidence to see this, but each of these green circles represents what the Institute for the Study of War is saying, as we can see down here by the key, significant fighting within the past 24 hours. And this has generally been the case with their maps and their backgrounders, that there has been rather significant fighting in and around these areas over the last 24 hours. And we've seen this actually, especially up here, kind of just to the north of Severodonetsk, the north and the east, significant fighting for the last couple of weeks. Their gains over the region, we cannot specifically say because, once again, we don't have enough independent information to be able to say if these gains are or are not correct. So that is currently the situation, at least coming from the Institute for the Study of War, and we are, based off of the other information we're getting, rather inclined to believe that they're, at least for the most part, representing an accurate depiction of at least the heavy fighting ongoing in the region. That doesn't mean that Russia is being successful in all fronts, though. And while we've seen significant fighting previously here on the channel, where we've seen significant fighting in places such as Tashkiva and Nizhny, We do know that Ukrainian forces did re-enter the village of, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Novotoshkivska, or Toshkivske. So we had an independent translator, or our translator in-house, I should say, go through and actually translate what the Ukrainian soldiers are saying. And he said, everything is on fire. Oh, hey, we can be a bicycle battalion. People used to live here. Now they don't. And we actually have that from this video. Take a look.
Все горит, все побито.
Блядь, велосипед тебе новий.
Нифига себе. Вельчик. Так, прикручуй колесо, буде велосипедний батальйон. Покришки нормальні, да?
Сука, оську переламало передню. З одної того можна їхати.
А тут колись жили люди. Вже не живуть.
О, а зараз глянемо підвал. Це ж наш дом. Ахуй.
And so, as you can see throughout this video, this village, for all intents and purposes, has been wiped off of the map. It is bombed out, burned out, and destroyed. And we see this time and time again throughout this war, where entire villages are essentially wiped clean. They exist only in prior satellite images and maps by name only. We can hear that there is still some sporadic fighting on the outskirts of the city, based on kind of those echoes that you're hearing, some of the explosions of incoming fire. But from what it appears, Ukrainian forces have really come through and cleaned out this area, and this has actually caused, from what we can tell, a bulge in this offensive lines. This wouldn't be the first time. In fact, the very first day of the Donbass offensive, while Russian forces took Hamina, the Ukrainians actually were down south, and they took Marinka back. So, very interesting, kind of a back and forth, blow by blow, along this entire front line. And there are, once again, Russia has not achieved any significant gains throughout this entire offensive. As we move further south along the front, as you can see today, there's a lot of yellow dots compared to red dots. And that means a very good thing for Ukraine. There's a lot of Ukrainian-focused information. That's how we designate things here on this channel. Anything in yellow is a Ukraine-focused bit of information. Anything in red is a Russian-focused bit of information. But as we travel further down here along the front, not all of this stuff has exact locations. We just know that it's happening along this eastern front in this fresh footage, including a Russian K-52 being shot down by Ukrainian forces. Not the first time, probably won't be the last. We know that the airspace over Ukraine is still considered contested. We've seen helicopters, attack helicopters, especially flying extremely low when they're conducting close air support operations. And we know that they are constantly being targeted by Ukrainian anti-air defenses, to include shoulder-fired man-pads, or what they know, man-portable air defense systems. So things like the Stinger missile, or the Igla, or the Strela, or the I want to say it's a Starstreak, the British anti-air system, the blowpipe anti-air system, which is a little bit older, but we have seen them still in existence and around. But we do have a video of that here today as well.
Иди. Низко идет.
Быстро йде дуже. Було попадання.
Михалыч?
Є, димано там.
Есть! Поход попали!
Андрюха, давай ще.
Вон, иди.
you see it, and you could hear it as that missile made contact. These engagements take place over very extensive extensive distances sometimes. So it is very tough to capture footage on things like a phone of something that's such a long range engagement. But we are inclined to believe that based off of the audio there, it sounds like they did successfully hit. We also are getting very recently reports of the very first, we shouldn't say the very first use of the Switchblade drone in combat, because we already aired that here. What this is the very first time we've seen the footage from the Switchblade drone itself during combat. It's a very short video, and what this is that we're getting ready to show you is this is actually the images from the Switchblade drone's control panel and its camera that's inside the system as it's going in for the kill. The Switchblade drone system, it's a tiny little portable. It basically fires out like a little mortar tube. You can carry it in a backpack. And the Switchblade drone is a kamikaze drone. It has a very long loitering time, meaning it can hang around the air and it can scan for targets for long periods of time. You can either set it to follow waypoints to an extent, from my understanding, or you can fly it manually. Doesn't really matter. Not to get anything too technical on how it can actually operate, but these systems, they are kamikaze drones, meaning they smash into their target and there's explosives that detonate and destroy whatever that target is. Once again, not to get into too many details here, but you can see that they're obviously rather effective against a wide scale of targets. As this one, these are the last few seconds prior to it impacting a Russian T-72 tank. So let's take a look at that here. So no audio. This is only 4 seconds long. This is the last few seconds of what the a drone operator is going to see when they're flying their drone, their Switchblade. So once again, I mean, right before it impacts the tank, this thing's getting ready to go hypersonic. It's slamming to this thing. So not quite that fast, but as an expression. And that's not the only type of air power we're seeing. In fact, we're seeing more Ukrainian jets in action. Over the last few weeks, since a large amount of spare parts have come in, Ukrainian forces have been able to increase the number of aircraft that they are able to put up into the air and operate. To give you an example as to why these spare parts were so important and why it was such a difficult thing to get more aircraft up in the air. For instance, there's another YouTuber, I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. I apologize. He's also an anti-tank missileman. He was for many years. He does a lot of short videos. Very good to go watch. He's very knowledgeable in what he's talking about. But the F-16, for every hour that the F-16 flies, it requires 17 hours of maintenance. And it's a newer jet. There's a lot more spare parts for it, and they're domestically produced within the United States. And it's a very common aircraft platform for the United States Air Force. The Ukrainian jets are relatively older by comparison. You're talking about MiG-29, stuff that really was fielded towards the end of the Cold War and the beginning of the Russian Federation. Stuff that's older, stuff that's been used since the 80s and the 90s without major upgrades or overhauls to them. And spare parts are very limited. You're talking about countries that at one point had to have been part of the Eastern Bloc to even receive these spare parts, or had been closely related to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union to have these spare parts. And so it's very limited in what they're able to do when they're flying this many sorties or flights, and putting this much stress on the airframes. Then it takes aircraft out of the fight when you're flying them and have nothing to fix them with. And even if they're not receiving any battle damage. But over the last few weeks, we're seeing significant amounts of Ukrainian aircraft conducting not just air cover, but also close air support now, which is a very big difference compared to what we were seeing earlier on in the war. So let's take a look at this quick video. So, just a couple of Ukrainian Su-25s. They're flying over. They're firing their ordnance and then popping flares immediately. This prevents them from being shot down from air defense systems, because the Russians also have portable air defense systems as well. The Igla and the Strela specifically are their main two. And according to Aristovich, who is a member of the Ukrainian government, I believe he's the presidential advisor, he is reporting today that a command center was hit using precision artillery. This could have been while we can't confirm this, that precision artillery likely means things such as using those M777 howitzers that have been provided with the Excalibur rounds, which have been provided, which are precision guided artillery munitions. Very rare, very limited, but also very effective for your target. They're saying that 20 plus senior officers have been killed. Whether this is an exaggeration or not, we do not know. This is not something we can confirm. All we can say is that Aristovich so far has been a rather reliable source on major incidents throughout the war, including the incident regarding the Moskva. And we can also, and when we hear things like this, whether or not the casualty report has been found to be true, independent sources, including the U.S. Department of Defense, the Ministry of Intelligence, or MI6, over in the United Kingdom, have reported that the incident itself has taken place. So we're inclined to believe that while the casualties may not be accurate, we can at least safely assume that the command center was hit, and it wouldn't be the first time during this war, as we've seen a significant loss of senior officers throughout the war on the side of the Russian forces. So, and yes, he is the advisor to the head of the presidential office. So, a very interesting source indeed, and he has rather close ties to know what's going on. TK. So, I'm trying to, someone said something regarding TKS, and I'm not quite sure what they are in reference to. So I'm going back here a little bit, see if I can find it.
Иди.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot find what you are in reference to. So if you give me a little bit more information, I'd be more than happy to probably elaborate if I know what it is. So once again, I apologize. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on a little bit further. So as we're moving further down, we're seeing more frontline action. So a lot of people live for helmet camera footage. I do not know why. There's entire communities based on it. I guess it's because people want to see what it's actually like. And as someone who has a little bit of experience with that, I can promise you do not want to know what it's actually like. It is a very big adrenaline rush, but it's also probably the most pit of the gut, unfortunate feeling you'll ever have in your life. But we're seeing helmet camera footage coming more and more out of the front lines. It is very limited as opposed to drone footage, which in this modern day and age is a little bit expected. Drone footage gives you a much wider scope and picture of the battlefield, and you can see actual troop movements and what's going on the wider scale. Helmet cameras are, not permitted by a lot of forces, because if you're captured or killed and they get a hold of that footage, it can show some very important things you don't want the enemy to see. And what you're seeing in videos online are probably edited footage, as we can safely say. And two, they are much more intimate, and not everyone wants to share those very intimate experiences. I maintain photos and videos of certain things that I have done. But not all of them I share publicly. They are more for myself than they are for anything, because I have those memories, but I don't necessarily want to disclose them to everybody. So you're not always going to, there may be a lot more of this footage they may just not be showing, because a lot of this stuff can, especially combat footage, can show things like your friends getting killed and whatnot, and it's not really something you want to share. But we can take a look at this. Uh-oh. Yep, and it would be, and the tweet has been deleted, so someone did not like that footage being on Twitter, unfortunately. So we do not have that combat footage for you. We originally did. So I once again apologize regarding that. It looks, unfortunately, we cannot prevent if such information is getting deleted or not. So we're going to go ahead and move on, and this is because some very interesting news came out today. We have seen stuff from James Vasquez, who's now back in the United States, had some close calls that he wasn't very comfortable with, and decided to go back home. No problem there, but that doesn't mean that everyone has gone home. A lot of foreign fighters in the foreign legions are in Ukraine still. They're actively in combat along the front lines. And we can see actually the American wing of the Foreign Legion here today with actual combat footage. We've seen a lot of immediate aftermath, but we have not seen a lot of actual combat footage from them thus far. We actually see them today destroying a Russian BTR, which is an armored personnel carrier. It's a wheeled armor personnel carrier. The thing about the volunteers is, especially when you're talking about those that are fighting within the American and the British wings of the Foreign Legion, these guys they're veterans. Most of them with combat experience from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Africa. A lot of them were in special operations. A lot of them had served in one or even multiple combat tours. So these guys know what they're doing. That is one of the reasons why they're so valuable to the war effort, is because not only have these guys, a lot of them have years of experience. Years more than, say, guys that, even Ukrainians that joined this, territorial defense forces at the beginning of the war. Despite heavy combat, these guys are still going to have more. So, very significant knowledge. They also have a lot of outside knowledge on different things that maybe Ukraine doesn't, and especially when it comes to weapon systems. So we can take a look at some of this footage here.
Brian, you lead. Go, 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 go.
Go! Shoot it now! Look, get up the back bar! Up the back bar! Go!
So very cool footage. We can see that they did successfully hit that BTR. BTRs notoriously, much like BMPs and BMDs, do not have thick armor. So light and medium anti-armor weapons, like what they're employing here, will 100% penetrate that. And that we can safely say, based off of just the explosion here, I can safely say that that BTR is likely out of commission. And we can see where the impact is, and you can actually see it on coming out the other side. So it is probably likely completely out of action and destroyed, and the crew has likely been killed in action. But sounds like there's British and Americans here within this, which makes sense because they speak the same language. It's easier for them to communicate. We're also seeing a lot of them have Western equipment. When I mean Western, I'm talking about M16, M4 style rifles, whether that's privately produced or militarily produced and shipped. Not concerned with the specifics there. So we know that they're getting very well equipped. They are getting small arms into Ukraine that these guys are going to know how to use better than, say, an AK. A lot of them are well versed in both. Anyone who has served probably has some experience with both to an extent, including myself. They do have like foreign weapons instructor courses and stuff in the military, at least here in the United States. But they're going to be much more. A lot of this stuff is muscle memory, and muscle memory saves lives, and they're going to be much more accustomed to that Western style. Whether that's reloading, whether that's sighting in, whether that's just the actions of your weapon, all of that stuff comes into play, and split seconds mean a lot on the battlefield. And we can see that down here, over in the kind of the edge here along the front lines, probably a little bit behind the lines here, but we put it up along here just because we can't tell exactly where. But it's in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, and a couple of Russian tanks were left abandoned in a field. Nothing we haven't seen before. And a couple of teenagers just kind of went up and started messing around on these tanks. I mean, really crap situation to have to be able to do this, but really cool opportunity to do this, especially as like a young teenager. Because when else, unless you join the military, when else are you just going to be able to play around a couple of abandoned Russian tanks? So let's take a look.
Товарищ наводчик, 90 градусов влево, крутим. Цель обнаружена, крути. Да это, блядь, вправо, влево крути. Алло, дебил. Блядь, ты сейчас дерево сломаешь. Похуй крути. Бля, дерево сломал. Сука.
Открывать огонь!
Да, прям в дерево. Бум, блядь.
Вниз она идет, смотри.
Это вверх. Ебать, она высокая пушка. Сука. Развлекуху нашли, я манал.
Стрелять!
Смотри, где мы уже? Мы сейчас по танку держимся.
Противник!
Патроны заряжай. Где тут патроны? Я их тоже должен снять. Вот патроны.
Опускаем нашу шнягу.
Только я тебе скажу, когда не опускать, потому что ты врежешься сейчас тут в танк.
Now, I 100% do not recommend or endorse any of this to anyone who may be local to Ukraine and watching this. As you can see, like, there's still live ammunition inside this tank. Well, I believe this one's actually... Yeah, I don't believe this is a tank. I think this is an SPG that they're in, but we can see the T-70... Or I believe this is T-72 sitting next to them, just based on what I can identify. If it is, it's like a B3 or a B3M. Or a BVM. But... do not recommend this. These things they're tools of war. They're not playthings. And you can, if you do not know what you're doing, you can significantly hurt people with this stuff. They're messing around. They're traversing the turret. They're increasing the direction and deflection of the turret. And there's live ammunition inside this vehicle. All it takes is one mess up. We don't even, who knows if this thing is loaded, because it's in a war zone. So they could have one in the breach and just hit one wrong button, hit the fire button, hit the fire pedal on that turret, just messing around. Then you're gonna launch a 152 millimeter shell through your neighbor's house. Saying their house is still there, of course. But like, I do not endorse this whatsoever. While it's cool, and it would be a cool experience as like a teenager. I mean, of course, you have to go through a lot of horrible things to have this experience. But while it's a cool experience to be able to mess with this stuff, at a young age, and while they probably find it fascinating, do not endorse this whatsoever. It is a terrible idea. If you do not know what you're doing, leave this stuff alone. Leave anything regarding the war alone, because this stuff is very dangerous. And also, we've seen the Russians booby trap a lot of things as they're leaving them behind. So, who's to say you don't open up a hatch and it pulls the pin on a hand grenade? And as we drop down into Mariupol, there's a couple of different statements that came out today from specifically Petro Andrushenko, who is the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, the Ukrainian advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, because they do have an occupational government there right now. And he said, first of all, 70 bodies of dead civilians have been found under the rubble of destroyed buildings by Russian occupiers on the territory of the former Oktyabr plant in Mariupol. We have video footage that we got very recently of them pulling out these body bags. So, and we're gonna hear a lot more of this. We're gonna see a lot of this, and this is an unfortunate fact of the matter, because they, like I said, Mariupol for all intents and purposes doesn't exist anymore. It's nothing more than a name on a map and some old satellite footage of a city that once was. The city has been bombed into oblivion, with its residents buried, decomposing underneath the rubble. That is Mariupol. That's all Mariupol is now. And that's not the only thing that happened today, and I'm going to go a little bit more in depth regarding some more international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention today regarding Mariupol. And this is because another statement, which we have seen multiple made thus far, and we can, coming from both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, safely say that this is actually indeed occurring. That on May 26th, so yesterday, Russian occupiers deported about 280 Ukrainian citizens, including 36 children, from Mariupol to a filtration camp in the village of Bezemin in the Donetsk region. Once again, coming from Petro Andrushenko, who's the advisor of the mayor of Mariupol. So, two things here. This violates two different sections of international law. First of all, it breaks the rules of the customary international humanitarian law, which is something that is followed by essentially every other nation in the world. And this is specifically rule number 129 under Volume 2, Chapter 38, Section A. And we can take a look here if I go to the International Committee of the Red Cross, also known as the International Committee of the Red Crescent. We can see here the only exception to this is under rule number 130, which covers both forcible and non-forcible transfer of populations to the occupational territory. We will get into that here in a little bit, but this comes in two parts. Parties of an international armed conflict, meaning two different countries, may not deport or forcibly transfer the civilian population of an occupied territory in whole or in part, unless the security of the civilians involved or imperative military reasons so demand. Part B is parties in a non-international conflict or a civil war or revolution may not order the displacement of the civilian population in whole or in part for reasons related to the conflict unless the security of civilians involved or imperative military reasons so demand. This includes, so what this involves is you cannot deport civilians, you cannot specifically deport civilians or forcibly displace civilians unless it is in their best interest. Meaning, when you bombed the city of Mariupol and shelled it into oblivion, instead of burying its, instead of killing and burying and starving the people in the city, Russia could have forcefully deported them, and it would have been covered under international law under this. And also under the Geneva Convention, which we're getting to look at next. But that's because it would prevent civilian casualties, aka unless the security of the civilians involved or imperative to military reasons so demand. That is when it's okay to deport civilians. If they had deported them before the Battle of Mariupol or during the Battle of Mariupol and sent them away, and so that way they wouldn't be killed as collateral damage in the fighting, that is okay. You're protecting the civilian populace at that point. That is not the case. They're doing it, the battle's over, they're far within occupied territory. There is no meaningful imperative military reason to do this. And it is not in the security interest of the civilians. Further, this also breaks what's also known as the Fourth Geneva Convention, which occurred on the 12th of August 1949, specifically under Part 3, Section 3, Article 49 on page 185. And I do have that here for you as well. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here. You can see here in the contents. But I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, page 185, 183. Here we go. Article 49. Deportations, transfers, and evacuations. Individual or mass forcible transfers, as well as the deportation of protected persons from occupied territory to the territory of an occupying power or to that of any other country, occupied or not, are prohibited regardless of their motive. Nevertheless, the occupying power may undertake total or partial evacuation of a given area if the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand. The exact same thing that was said in Rule number 129, which is based off of the Geneva Convention. Such evacuations may not involve the displacement of protected persons outside the bounds of the occupied territory, except when for material reasons it is impossible to avoid such displacement. Persons thus evacuated shall be transferred back to their homes as soon as hostilities in the area in question have ceased. The battle for Mariupol is over now, by the way, in case anyone missed that major news that we reported here. The occupying power undertaking such transfers or evacuations shall ensure, to the greatest practicable extent, that proper accommodation is provided to receive the protected persons, that the removals are effected in satisfactory conditions of hygiene, health, safety, nutrition, and that the members of the same family are not separated. The protecting power shall be informed of any transfers and evacuations as soon as they have taken place. The occupying power shall not detain protected persons in an area particularly exposed to the dangers of the war unless the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand. The occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. That is the Fourth Geneva Convention, word for word, Article number 49 that I just read. Word for word. This is the law of war. This is what you can and cannot do to civilian populations. Based off of the filtration camp checkpoint system that was put in place during the First and Second Chechen Wars, in which tribunals have been held under the International Criminal Court, we do know that filtration camps are places of systematic beating, rape, torture, threats, summary execution, starvation, and sleep deprivation. None of those fit anything within this. The removals are effected in a satisfactory conditions of hygiene, health, safety, nutrition, and that the members of the same family are not separated. These are the laws of war. Why is this important? And why is this important in a historical context? The 1949 Geneva Convention took part immediately after the Nuremberg trials and were in immediate repercussion to the acts of the Holocaust and for the conning of the term genocide. Genocide was not a word until the Nuremberg trials, as Jewish survivors of the Holocaust had to coin a new term in order to describe the very issues that they had gone through. There was no word to describe what had happened during the Holocaust until the trials. The August of 1949, the Fourth Geneva Convention specifically focuses on the protections of civilians and of non-combatants and medical personnel during wartime in war zones, essentially, in order to prevent further genocide. In fact, genocide prevention under the UnitedNations.org is exactly where this PDF comes from. So, that is why when we hear and we talk about Russian forces are deporting Ukrainians to a filtration camp, why this is a war crime. Now, this is the second day in a row where I've talked extensively regarding international law. And this is because international law and the Geneva Convention, and these phrases get thrown around a lot. And it's stuff that you hear on a daily basis when you're talking about the war in Ukraine, but a lot of people don't know what the international law actually means. There are instances that you can deport civilians, and it is 100% okay. However, when they're doing it and how they're doing it in Mariupol and other parts of Ukraine is what makes it no longer okay. It's why it is now a war crime. Forceful deportation back to Russia. Forceful after hostilities have ended. Mariupol is no longer a combat zone. Mariupol is now an occupied ruins. I shouldn't even say city, but an occupied ruins far behind the lines in a very well-established occupied territory within Ukraine. Which is why the deportations, especially to camps that do not meet any of those needs under the Geneva Convention, makes this a war crime. Let alone the already held and guilty verdicts that were received during the International Criminal Court trials in the late 90s and early 2000s regarding the filtration camp system by the Russian Federation in the First and Second Chechen Wars. So I will talk more and more extensive and get a little bit more in depth when we're talking about humanitarian law, because I think it's important when we're talking about this during this conflict. Once again, that stuff is getting thrown around a lot, and not everyone knows what it means. Some people have better understandings than others, but there are a lot of things. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to international law and the laws of war. And a lot of the stuff that we're seeing are very flagrant violations of these international laws and of the Geneva Convention. And I want to show you why. I want to show you this is what is being said, this is what is happening, and this is what the law says you are supposed to do. Because to have that understanding and that knowledge is more powerful than just to understand the context. You can understand that people are getting deported and it's awful, but it's more awful when you realize that there's a reason why it's a war crime to do that, and that's to prevent genocide. The very thing that Ukraine is currently going to the International Criminal Court to say is occurring against their people. This is why. And with that, that's actually all of the news inside of Ukraine, but there's plenty of other news going on throughout the world, including several different bits of news that have to deal with Ukraine. And we're actually going to roll immediately right into that when we're talking about Russia. And so the first thing that we have is actually here along the Ukrainian-Russian border here in Belgorod. And that's because Belgorod currently is being shaken by multiple explosions. We cannot verify any targets. We cannot verify how many. We cannot verify any of this. We just are hearing reports that there are explosions within the city, and that we also know that the air defenses in and around the city have become active over the last few days, or over the last few hours. So we can take a look at this. And this includes return fire of Iskander missiles coming from Belgorod as well. Let's take a look.
5 штук будет сегодня. Или 7.
Кошмар! Боже!
At about 3 p.m. local time today, President Zelensky actually stated that so far throughout the duration of the war, up until this point, Russia's actually fired over 2,400 missiles and rockets into Ukrainian territory. So it is a significant amount of ordnance that has gone into Ukraine and caused significant losses of life, especially to the civilian populace, and also significant damage to civilian infrastructure nationwide. However, the calls grow louder in Russia, and this is because the Communist Party within the Duma, which is basically the parliament or the Congress of Russia, Communist Party representatives, aka the people that still believe the Soviet Union is a good thing, came from the Far East today, and during a session within the Duma, Primorye Krai of the Communist Party of Russia said that they openly stated that Russia needs to immediately end the war today. We have a video here.
Заседание, где мы приняли комплекс мер поддержки семей погибших военнослужащих, от группы депутатов составлено следующее обращение президенту Российской Федерации. Здесь 7 предложений. Уважаемый президент Российской Федерации, обращаюсь к вам,
Леонид Юрьевич.
Группа депутатов Законодательного собрания...
Леонид Юрьевич, вы меня слышите?
Несколько дней назад на очередном заседании Законодательного собрания мы приняли комплекс мер поддержки семей военнослужащих погибших, получивших ранения в ходе военной операции. Мы понимаем, что если наша страна не прекратит военную операцию, то сирот в нашей стране станет еще больше. В ходе военной операции гибнут и становятся инвалидами молодые люди, которые могли бы принести огромную пользу нашей стране. Почти 3 месяца, прошедшие с начала...
Леонид Юрьевич, раз мы обсуждаем повестку дня.
Что военным путем достичь успеха невозможно. Продолжение военной операции приведет к неминуемому увеличению количества погибших и раненых военнослужащих. Мы требуем немедленного вывода войск Российской Федерации.
Юрьевич, я вам делаю предупреждение.
Мы требуем прекратить...
Вы вышли из повестки, из регламента.
Леонид Юрьевич, нарушаете регламент.
So as you can see, they try to shut him up, and it does not work. He just keeps going. So the calls are growing as body bags continue to return home to Russia. People are going to start noticing. People are going to start questioning. Once again, the Russian people aren't stupid people. The Russian people are not stupid people. Your average Russian is exactly the same as you or me. And should an action like this, regardless of whatever propaganda is being put forth by the government, who is currently in control of all of the different media stations, regardless of propaganda, when body bags are coming home and young men and women are dying on the front lines day in and day out on a military operation that was supposed to be short-lived and was not expected to have severe casualties, and the war continues to drag on, people are going to start asking questions. And those questions and those cries are going to grow louder and louder and louder. This is not something that we're going to see immediately, but every small bit is more and more powerful. So it's important to understand Russia is not going to fall flat on its face overnight. It will take many people to die. It will take many horrific tragedies, as it already has. And it will take a very long period of time for people to understand what's going on, if they ever truly do. And with that, we go ahead and we move into the Middle East. And the Middle East has a couple of different developments going on today. Most significantly, I would say, though, is the fact that Iran seized 2 different Greek tankers in the Persian Gulf. So Tehran warned that it would take punitive action against Athens over the confiscation of Iranian oil by the United States from a tanker held off the Greek coast. This is because Iranian oil and Russian oil... So Iran has a lot of sanctions and tariffs put on it. And so they aren't supposed to be able to export oil to essentially anybody. So those shipments get seized. And this is a major point of contention. This is why there are U.S. naval warships and coalition warships that patrol the Gulf. And I believe it's also known as the Strait of Hormuz here. But they are patrolling this region because Iran has significant control in this region. They're a significant threat to international tankers. And this isn't the very first thing. So they didn't elaborate on what the violations that were committed by these tankers were. And keep in mind, this is the Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, which actively trains insurgencies to kill Americans. aka Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq. Like, it's been proven they fired missiles because of it. At U.S. forces. Al-Assad and Erbil, 2020. January and February of 2020. That's all I need to say on that. Not to elaborate any further, but Greece responded by saying that these are tantamount to acts of piracy. This is something we've already heard. This rhetoric is repeating itself. We've heard this multiple times before. They're saying this was a violent seizure. And this came amid a dispute between the two nations because of an Iranian cargo oil vessel that was boarded on board of a Russian flagged tanker. So this Russian flagged tanker, keep in mind, Russia is currently also has the most insane sanctions ever put on in history of any nation. There's never been more severe economic sanctions than what are against Russia right now. So it was seized, the tanker was seized because it was Russian flagged. Secondly, it's Iranian oil, which is also sanctioned. Everyone in the international community knows this. And Iran is saying that these are violent seizures. These break international law. They don't. They are breaking international law in two different ways right now. So that is currently an ongoing situation. We'll see how that escalates, but it would be the first tanker seized, and it probably won't be the last as tensions continue between Iran and many Western countries. In Afghanistan today, relationship building is really the name of the game right now. And that's because Afghanistan, despite all of its issues currently, knows it has to make a name for itself and it has to build relationships with its neighbors. We've seen them building relationships with Iran. We've seen summits with China, India, Pakistan, when they are saying that the head of the Haqqani network, Anas Haqqani, is saying that in an interview with CNN News 18, the Taliban have established good relations with Pakistan and intend to do so in respect for all neighbors, be it Iran, India, or etc. And since Afghanistan needs them all, they are also saying that they will welcome any infrastructure projects and assistance from India within the country of Afghanistan. So they are attempting to build good relations despite having rather poor rapport. So we can actually take a look at this here.
But Mr. Haqqani, one of the biggest disconcerting issues is the proximity or perceived proximity of this Taliban government with Pakistan. What is the relationship with the Pakistanis and how much of an influence do they wield?
Pakistan,
we have good neighborly relations with Pakistan, and we will establish good and friendly relations in our neighborhood, be it with Iran or India. We need all our neighbors for the good of our people. This is the policy and roadmap of Emirate. We are already tired of war for the last 40 years and no longer wish or intend to carry it forward.
So just to cut it short there, because I don't want to steal CNN stuff, but unfortunately there's just limited, we don't have any Taliban connections here, and I do not wish to make any Taliban connections due to some personal feelings. But the Taliban are trying to build international relations. They are in control of a country now, whether we like to admit it or recognize it. Afghanistan is in large majority, I cannot say all, because of the resistance movements in the territory that they control, but the vast majority of Afghanistan is an emirate now. It is controlled by the Taliban, and that is not going to change for some time. And they have duties and responsibilities as leaders of a nation now to build those international relations, no matter how tainted they may have been because of the insurgencies, because of Osama bin Laden, because of terror attacks, because of any of that. They continually try to put on a good face, but behind closed doors, it seems, especially in regards to women's rights, they are starting to roll back into that pre-U.S. invasion style of government and control. And a little bit of good news as we move further east here, and that's because in Mongolia, an endangered species increased in its population. So the Gobi bear, also known as mazale, exceeded 50. So originally in 2018, the last record of this, only 36 Gobi bears remained in the world. So they released. So the Minister of the Environment and Tourism appreciated China's help in assisting the country in doing this, but their population has grown, while it still is significantly endangered, with 51 animals still alive at this point and left in the species. This means that they are on a slow route to recovery. This takes decades, but if this trend continues, that's going to be one less major animal species that is no longer going to be endangered or could possibly go extinct. So we're getting this from Macabre Business if you guys want to check out a little bit more, but kind of some good news. There's an animal species that's not going to go extinct, so that's good news. And as we drop down here into Africa, there's a couple of different developments that are ongoing. And the first thing is that 7 al-Shabaab militants were actually killed during a counterterrorism operation in Middle Shabelle, which is just kind of to the north of Mogadishu, to the northeast. And al-Shabaab is an Al-Qaeda-linked terror group. They're essentially just Africa's version of Al-Qaeda. But 2 of the members were arrested, and at the scene of the fighting, the security forces and the military actually ended up seizing weapons and IEDs from those militants. So that further decreases their ability to wage work. Granted, they also just took over an entire military outpost not too long ago. So we know that this group is still rather powerful no matter what kind of counterterrorism operations you're going to go on. And there's still a very long way to go in fighting the terrorism there in Somalia. But at least there's some progress. However, fighting here along the Democratic Republic of the Congo's eastern border has displaced 72,000 people, and according to the United Nations, 72,000 people had to flee from their homes because of fighting between the DRC's army and also the M23 rebels. So the M23 rebels represent the interests of ethnic Tutsis within the eastern part of the DRC, and this is really what's been going on. So they're staging their largest offensive since 2012 and 2013. What this really goes back to is during the conflict, really the conflict with from Rwanda. This is because of the Rwandan genocide in 1994. There were already Tutsi rebels in the region, and then the Rwandan genocide occurred back in 1994. And between the Hutu, who are the vast majority of people within Rwanda, and the Tutsi, who are currently fighting an insurgency and are the minority within Rwanda. But were under colonial rule, the Tutsi were considered more favorable than the Hutu. After colonial rule really ended, there was a lot of tension, and the governments got overthrown. There's a lot of details I really can't go in here. But this killed thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands of people died during the Rwanda genocide. And because of this, the after effects are still being felt today. Constant fighting since 1996 along the border of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo because of the M23 rebels. 5.6 million internally displaced people inside the Democratic Republic of the Congo. At least 1.9 million are in North Kivu, the province in which the current fighting has taken place here along the border. And this is on top of other things such as volcanic eruptions and other, just general situations currently going on in the DRC that already has its own insecurities. And keep in mind, the DRC is also dealing with the Islamic State and other terror organizations as well. So, unfortunate that those effects are still being felt today, but history is not broken up into neat chunks. It is continuous, and everything affects everything else. And despite happening in 1994, the effects of the Rwandan genocide are felt still in Africa to this very day, and will always be felt likely in some way, shape, or form. As we jump over to Goa over here in Mali, we see that France is completely withdrawn from Mali. In fact, photos of the latest French logistics convoy, really the last to leave the Goa base in Mali, have surfaced online. And this really marks the completion and the end of any French involvement in the country of Mali. The Mali is controlled by a military junta, which has officially said that they no longer want to have any security deals with the country of France, which was its former colonial protectorate, and also assisted them in fighting rebels and terror organizations within the country for some time. And so this is a rather shock to them, but France has pulled out in respective understanding of that independent decision, and the understanding that while they may not agree with it, it is a sovereign nation, then they are no longer a colonial power. So we can take a look here. And you can see, I mean, a lot of these, when large military forces are on the move, they're using a lot of contractors and they're flatbedding a lot of their equipment because it's a lot cheaper than just driving it, believe it or not, and a lot safer. And then you see just Connex box after Connex box after Connex box on the back of these trucks filled with equipment, food, whatever. So they're taking anything they brought with them, they're taking it with them, and they're leaving. And that marks the end of French military operations in the country of Mali. And so we jump over into North America and Central and South America. And as we take a look here, famine so far has left 374 children dead since 2017 within parts of Colombia, specifically Guardia province. So 2/3 of the region's residents live below the poverty line, and only 1 in 5 have access to clean drinking water. This is very significant. So this is what I mean by humanitarian aid, and these kinds of assistance are going to impact and further impact places with food insecurities, water insecurities. That humanitarian aid that may have reached Colombia at some point, coming from like the World Food Center and the United Nations, that stuff got redirected over to Ukraine. And Ukraine, being the breadbasket of Europe, that grain that cannot be exported because it's currently under blockade by Russian forces, a lot of that grain is used for those humanitarian efforts. So not only are they having to redirect what humanitarian aid they already have from places such as Colombia, where malnutrition is now an issue, and also Somalia, Southeast Asia, etc., but they now they're not getting the stocks of grain and food that they normally would have to replenish those stocks of humanitarian aid, those stockpiles. So that is part of the issues. This is why you're seeing rising food prices. This is why you're seeing issues with humanitarian aid in places like the Tigray region in Ethiopia. This is why you're seeing shortcomings in the whole logistical lines across Europe when it comes to certain types of food products in the United States and globally. The whole logistical supply chain, which has already had a very hard time under COVID-19, is now really bending under the weight of the war in Ukraine and COVID-19 on top of that. So in a world that was just recovering, this happened, and it has completely really immobilized the logistical capabilities of the world to feed large amounts of people, especially in areas of need. As we jump up here to El Salvador, we can see that a state of emergency was extended in El Salvador. Specifically, President Nayib Bukele, who the legislatures, so the parliaments or Congress of El Salvador, basically extended his emergency powers in order to crack down on gang violence. 67 members of the Latin country, 67 of the 84 members of the legislature voted on Wednesday in order to back a 30-day extension of these emergency powers. These were originally first approved in March, and that's following a surge of gang violence, including 62 murders within 24 hours. So it's really a war on gangs. It's also a war on drugs, as the crackdown, as a lot of these gangs are dealing with drug smuggling and the cartels. So this is really where it's at. He's using the military and police forces to really begin that crackdown and improve security within the nation. And we're getting this from Al Jazeera if you want to check out a little bit more on that information as well. We're actually going to skip over Mexico right now. We're actually going to jump up here to Washington, D.C., and this is coming out of the Pentagon. So John Kirby, who's the spokesman of the Pentagon and is also a former admiral in the U.S. Navy, stated today that Russian President Vladimir Putin has achieved exactly 0 of his strategic objectives in the Ukrainian city of Severodonetsk, which has become the center of the fierce fighting in the east, which is what we were just talking about. He also stated that Putin is not ready for negotiations and should not count on them in the near future. This is kind of coming alongside as multiple media sources are reporting that the United States is probably going to be sending HIMARS over to Ukraine. This is something that has been discussed. This is heavily debated. This is not something that the United States is so keen on sending to Ukraine for various reasons. HIMARS are extremely long range, very effective, but also very expensive, and a lot of their tech in how they work and how they do their job so well is also top secret. And they're also one of the major points for the US's further strategic defense plans going forward. The ability to have these mobile HIMARS stations and a HIMAR is just a multi-rocket launch system, or an MLRS. Think of like a really smart Grad system, as we've already seen in the war. The Grads fire a bunch of dumbfire Katyusha rockets, and they just saturate an area. These things are cool. These HIMARS are awesome. They can fire very long-range precision munitions on target. Think of any of the cruise missiles that are being used, those short-range cruise missiles being used in Ukraine. Think of any of those, and this thing is putting it within like 20 meters of where it's supposed to be. Less than like 20 meters of wherever it's supposed to land, it's going to land. I think some of the munitions get even closer than that, within like a meter or something. It's ridiculous. I don't know the specifics on the HIMAR. It wasn't my job, and that kind of stuff's on a need-to-know basis, and I didn't need to know. But they're very long range and they're very precision fire weapons, and the possibility of them being sent to Ukraine could be an absolute game changer for Ukrainian forces, as long as they know how to use it and properly employ it, which is something that we have already seen being trained in places such as Germany and Poland, where Ukrainian forces are coming to those countries and being trained on these weapon systems before they're being given and employed in the fight, to make sure the Ukrainians can best use them within the best of their capabilities. So we're seeing this stuff coming from both CNN and also the Wall Street Journal. And of course, you can go to the website for the Pentagon and pull up the transcripts and prior press releases and briefings. And finally, to wrap up the night, we jump back down to the Yucatan Peninsula, where a Mayan city was found in Merida. So Merida is right up here, really close to the coast. And the site is called Ziyol, which was a Mayan Puc style of architecture that they're finding. Originally, this is under a place where they're going to be building an industrial park. So they're getting ready to put a bunch of factories here, and they were digging in the ground, and all of a sudden they start hitting all these structures. You're talking plazas, temples, palaces, pyramids, the whole 9 yards. And despite putting an industrial park here, they're looking at actually preserving all of these archaeological remains and really building the park around it, the industrial park around them. So that way it's not lost to time once again, or destroyed by the industrial work being done up above. They think that this city of Ziyol could house up to 4,000 people around it, and it it is estimated to have been occupied between 600 and 900 AD. So just about 1,500 years ago, up until about 1,000 years ago. So very cool. Very cool indeed. So we actually have a couple of different pictures coming out of this. So there's a picture of one of those buildings there. and some of the artifacts that they're finding. And they're finding a whole bunch of different things. So very cool archaeological discovery. I mean, we've seen everything from lost Mayan cities being found in the jungle by people just wandering around on Google Maps, to drone footage, to radar, to all sorts of things. But really, you're not going to know what's there until you dig. And in places with a lot of history like this, where these very long-lasting structures were built, a lot of this stuff just gets found because people dug in the ground for construction. And they hit a bunch of cool-looking rocks that are in a really weird pattern, and they're like, okay, we got to stop. So, but it's very cool. It's very cool that they're finding more history. It's very cool that they found an entire new city for an entire civilization. They still don't know why the Mayans abandoned a lot of their cities. They still don't know what really caused the major decline of the Mayans. But it's very cool to see that they're at least getting more pieces to the puzzle, if nothing else. So I find archaeology and paleontology absolutely fascinating. If you cannot tell, I think it's really cool. But of course, we're getting this stuff from The Guardian. So also a great news source if you guys ever want to check them out and read more about it. And with that, that's actually all of the news inside of the country of Ukraine and in the world, actually. So with that, there's obviously a lot of stuff going on in the world. And I understand that there is a lot of bias, especially when it comes to Ukraine, but that's something that we have previously declared. And we try to stay neutral on a lot of issues, but I also have my personal biases, and so does everyone else that works on a team, and we're only human. We do try to stay apolitical on as many things as we can, but I'm going to once again openly declare the fact that we have a bias towards Ukraine based off of, one, the international laws, but also based off of the footage that we have personally seen coming out of here. We also have individuals within the team that are from Ukraine that have personal relations and have a lot more information that they translate for us. They get a lot of this stuff for us. I just add my voice to this and any prior knowledge I have from the military or history, but I just add my voice. The team is who is really behind this, and I cannot thank them enough. Without them, none of this would be possible. So please give a big shout out to the team there. Once again, they rock. They're what make this news the news. But we do have a Ukrainian bias, just based off of what we've seen. We cannot in good conscience back the Russian Federation in any way, shape, or form. But other than that, we try to maintain a rather unbiased opinion and apolitical opinion on everything else. And the reason for that is because a lot of things have those biases, and a lot of those things get skewed because they want money. We don't want money. I have a full-time job. I don't need it. What I want people to help us get monetized for is so we can put fundraisers on this. And we want community involvement. We want people to really be able to do good and to help people that are affected by the news. We want to be the news that gives back. We don't just want to give the news to you. We want to give back to the people that are affected by these immediate crises and issues. So please check out the description below and check out all of those different donation links. We vetted them all. We made sure that they're all official. 80% or more of all of the donations go directly to their programs. So 80% goes directly to helping people. 20% or less goes to salaries or administration's costs. And those are according to different fundraiser websites where they're going through and vetting these and going through their legal reports, and also us taking a look at their legal reports too and their financial reports over the years. We want to be able to make sure that we're doing as much good in the world as possible. But we cannot do that without you. It is a 100% community effort involvement. And we don't need to know about these donations. We just like to know that we're doing good. And being able to put them onto the stream would be even better. So if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, please give us a like and subscribe. Because the more people we reach, the more independent news people will get. And kind of get away from some of those mainstream media news stations that do not necessarily explicitly say what biases they may or may not have. And and talk a lot about the politics on things. And also, the more people that can donate and can help these people throughout the world, not just in Ukraine, but places that are affected all over the world. I mean, the Horn of Africa, Southeast Asia specifically. Those are the ones that we've been able to find fundraisers for. And there are millions of people in these regions that, without our help, will suffer. And unfortunately, many of them will die, especially in the Horn of Africa, where children at the ages 5 and under are specifically at risk. So I really appreciate everyone joining us and for everyone's support. And please, if you want to rack our brains, or if you want to ask some more questions, or if I didn't get to a question during the stream, please go and check out our Discord. You can ask me any questions there. And we don't have just discussions regarding Ukraine, but for every single region in the world. So you can talk about whatever and have discussions. A lot of very smart people post a lot of stuff in there. Some of it even makes it into the streams. And join our community, rack my brain. I got a lot of knowledge up here that's not good for literally anything else. So, and as well, and other people have a lot of information on a lot of different topics as well. So with that, I hope you'll join us on that community, but I also hope that you will join us tomorrow once again for another day of news. And so my name is Paul from the New News. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you remain safe, your family and your friends remain safe. And should they not be, I hope they find that safety and security in the very near future. I hope that you guys have a wonderful night. Have a wonderful Saturday tomorrow, or today if it's that part of the world for you. And I hope that you get to spend a lot of good time with your family and enjoy your weekend. And with that, I will talk to you guys later. Have a wonderful night. Bye.